I'd like to call this meeting of the Jamestown School Board to order. It is Monday, June 5th, and we're in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school, and it's 5:15. I'd like to recognize all those in the audience as well. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jamie, would you be willing to read the school board norms?
Absolutely. Share and respect opinions and speak with a united voice once the decision has been reached. Execute all duties of school board in compliance with North Dakota Century Code. Properly prepare for meetings. Commit to assessing board effectiveness and ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is C, Public Communication. Katrina Christensen, would you please come forward, state your name and address? Yep, and the mic should be on. So.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. I'm Katrina Christensen. I live at 310 4th Avenue Southeast, Jamestown, North Dakota, 58401. I would like to thank you all for your commitment to our education system in Jamestown and for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you. As a representative of Washington Elementary PTO, I want to share some of our concerns about the recommendation for a dean of students or administrative intern at Washington instead of a principal. In 2020, we were given more time to organize and reach out to other parents to address a very similar proposal, Board Memo 57. We developed and deployed a survey to gather information relative to student safety and learning from our parent population. And we found that a large majority of parents with students at Washington support a new hire to assume duties full-time at Washington. We continue to be concerned, if not more, about the impacts of a split principal and an admin intern combination on student safety and education. We are concerned about the need for intervention in classrooms that does not align with a split principal schedule or ability to drive across town. In 2020, we provided this board with documentation on how important principals are to school success and their leadership to improving student outcomes. We provided data regarding principals who spend time on organizational duties rather than administrative ones, seeing greater gains in student performance. We continue to strongly oppose the use of co-opting a counselor to assume the role of a principal or disciplinarian, as it is inappropriate. And the counselor at Louis and Washington will be out half the year in 2023-2024. The proposal for a dean of students or admin intern is missing an essential component for administrative training. An experienced and effective principal always on site to allow the intern to learn and develop skills. Grand Forks Public Schools does have dean of students, but there's also a principal and assistant principal at those schools. Fargo no longer has interns, they just have head and vice principals. Parents have communicated that having a principal is imperative to Washington's student population. If there is such a workforce shortage in Jamestown or North Dakota that requires that JPS adopt this model, then it's important that this vulnerable population have the district's most effective principal, and the intern be allowed to train at the school's district's most stable institution. Washington has the highest enrollment of economically disadvantaged students in the district, nearly double that of Louis L'Amour's enrollment, and there are many students with high needs. New educational evidence shows that principal turnover in high poverty schools negatively impacts student success, which runs counter to using Washington as a training ground where turnover is part of the model. We think it makes more sense for a full-time principal to be at Washington, whether that means reopening the search or shifting resources so that the most effective principal in the district can be at Washington and an intern at the most stable. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Moving on our agenda, any conflicts of interest to declare? Aaron, that already haven't been declared. Would you like to change?
No change in
anything?
status.
No change in status. Thank you, Aaron. I didn't add that second part, so thank you. Any other conflicts of interest? Any other conflicts of interest? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda. At any time, a board member can remove something from the consent agenda. It does not need a second. Is there anything you'd like removed from the consent agenda? Is there anything you'd like removed from the consent agenda? Is there anything you'd like removed from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion? Motion by Jamie to approve the consent agenda, second by Gail. We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on to our regular meeting. Nothing under recognition, nothing under correspondence. Under reports, we have a food service report. Cindy Wall, please come forward.
Hello. Right, I have a food service department nutrition report for this year. All employees received a 6.7 wage increase at the beginning of the school year. There were a total of 25 food service employees. Lunch prices were increased this year according to the Federal Rule of Equity, Section 205 of the Healthy Hunger Act. Elementary prices were $68 a month or $3.40 per meal. Secondary prices were $72 per month or $3.60 per meal. That's high school and middle school. Reduced lunch was at 40 cents. Adult lunch was at $4.75. Breakfast at $2.40 for the elementary and $2.50 for the secondary. Reduced breakfast was at $0. Adult breakfast was $3.75. All meals must be 75 cents higher than the highest student lunch paid per Federal Rule of Equity. Unpaid negative student account balances for the school breakfast lunch program totals negative $19,623.76. Food service has not taken any accounts to collections. The current procedure involves cashiers, counselors, principals, food service director, and the superintendent working together as a team to help contact parents or guardians for the payment to try to keep the unpaid meal debt to a minimum. As previously stated, the federal government subsidized the program both financially and with commodities. Reimbursement rates were 85 cents for full price meals, $4.01 for reduced price meals, and $4.41 for free price meals. Reimbursement rates for breakfast were 50 cents for full price, $2.26 for reduced, and $2.26 for free. The value of commodities received this year was $52,818.30. $10,619.68 was spent this year with the net off invoice program available through USDA and distributors. The government program called USDA DOD Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program allows schools to use their entitlement dollars to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables through a local distributor. That totaled $52,893.51. The funding received from this program allowed for all schools to benefit and allowed more than one serving of fresh fruit and vegetables. It was encouraged to take as much as you were able to eat, and I allowed them all to go back for seconds if they wanted. Overall, the government entitlement spent was $116,331.49. During the 175 school days, 230,593 reimbursable student lunches were served. About 62,000 were free, 23,000 were reduced, and about 145,000 were full priced. There were 4,810 adult free lunches. This is for food service employees, principals, secretaries, teachers who supervise students, and workers who clean tables and help serve in the lunchroom. and 2,753 paid adult lunches. During the 175 school days, 56,499 reimbursable breakfasts were served at all schools. Of the total, 27,435 were free, 8,573 were reduced, and 20,491 were full price. There were 74 paid adult breakfasts and 0 free adult breakfasts. 4 schools qualified for the severe need rate at breakfast. Those reimbursements were 31 cents for full priced, $2.14 for free priced, and $1.84 for reduced price. The high school satellited roughly 200 total daily lunches to Washington and Lincoln elementary schools. Based on observation, I'm just new this year, this was my first full year, but going back, post-pandemic, the school lunch program served 27,074 less reimbursable breakfasts and 39,972 less reimbursable lunches over the last year since COVID-19 pandemic, which was the end of 2019 to 2022, when all breakfasts and lunches were federally reimbursed through the USDA. At the start of the 22-23 school year, free, reduced, and full pay were reinstated. The last time paying for breakfast and lunch, again, was 2018-2019 school year. Free meals, the COVID Relief Act, lasted through the end of, or started at the end of 2019, about March. 2020-21, 21-22 school years. At the beginning of the 22-23 school year, all meal debt was cleared to a zero balance for all parents, guardians at the Jamestown Public Schools. 4 elementary schools qualified for after-school snacks: Lincoln, Washington, Roosevelt, and Louis L'Amour. Reimbursement rates for that was 9 cents for full-price snacks, 54 cents for reduced-price snacks, and $1.08 for free-price snacks. A total of 9,799 students participated daily. All elementary schools were the recipients of the USDA Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program grant, FFVP. Lincoln received $1,688. Louis L'Amour received $840. Roosevelt received $1,656, and Washington received $768. Gessner received $2,016. No prices have been set for the 23-24 school year. The state has not set their reimbursement rates for the next year. Beginning July 1st, 2023, starting the 23-24 school year, the state of North Dakota will implement State Free 200. ND has set the income guidelines up to 200% of the poverty level. Finally, House Bill number 1494 is going into effect the next school year as well. Anti-lunch shaming bill will also include basically no alternative meals, which we were ahead of and already decided to do that before the school year began. No denying a meal for a negative account balance, and may only contact students' parents or guardians for an unpaid meal balance. So there's no reminding them out loud in line. And that is all I have.
Any questions from the board? Aaron?
Could you just characterize the negative balance, the 19,000 negative balance, in terms of, is this a small amount spread across a lot of students, or is there bigger amounts amongst a smaller population, or can you just kind of characterize that?
It's pretty much spread across adults and students. So if you have a family of 4 and they're negative $200 a kid, that's $800 right there of it. So yeah, pretty much all across the board. No one school is greater than the other, so.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Dr. Luck?
If I could just make a comment, Cindy, thank you for the report too. When we're talking the 19,000 lunch balance, we also have a account that supports those that have needs, and we are always welcome to take donations that support that fund. But we have not utilized that fund for our neediest families yet, correct?
No,
Because
no,
we have
they-
not met yet. And so that 19,000 does not consider that some of those will be wiped to zeros because of that fund that exists to support our neediest families. So there will be some decrease from that 19,000, but that is, quite a bit higher, which we expected, but quite a bit higher than it has been in years past.
We are
But
pretty-
we will be able to draw that down, that 19,000, and maybe, Mr. Roberts, to your point, we'll get a little more data in the next meeting in my report that looks at kind of average costs, what's the average amount per student maybe, how many are within certain bands, how much of that is 25 and below, how much of that is, 26 to 100, how much of that is over 100 per student. So you can kind of get a sense of what you're looking at a little bit. But we'll do that analysis once we have a chance to apply that additional funding support for some of those families.
Just one more comment. We're pretty much in line with every other big school district. It is across the state this way, which, again, we knew was going to happen, so going back to paid. But North Dakota's doing a good thing, I think, taking it over and raising their guidelines, so maybe it'll help next year.
Jason has a
Are we
question.
still in the collection phase for any of this, or?
I have not done any collections yet. That is something I go to Dr. Leck next with I believe it's over 200. I give him a list and, yeah, but I haven't sent anybody yet. I just kind of maybe say might send you to collections and then the phones start ringing, so yeah.
I guess I stated my question poorly. Collections is a strong word. Do you anticipate recouping any of that 19,000 yet, just through collecting?
I can answer that. Yes, we do collect, and I will address the collection. Collection, a very, very high bar. That is not typically something that we go down the road for. That's why we have our other support. That is not a direction that we want to pursue. There's always those instances in which you may have to, but that's an awfully high bar, and we would prefer to use other interventions before we even have that conversation.
Any other questions? And I visited with Dr. Luck a little bit about some of this information is just new and a little bit preliminary to, like, particularly the debt part. And Dr. Luck at the next meeting will provide just some breakdowns and just some more information. Also want to thank our public for their donations
It's
to
been
this fund
amazing. Yeah.
to help our most neediest children. So
Yes,
and we will say
thank
that
you.
again at the next meeting, but I just want to thank our public out there. Any other questions or information? Aaron, go ahead.
Can you just put a plug in for the donations? How do people do that? How can they, if
They
they
can
have a willingness to
contact-
help, how do they do that?
Yeah, they can call the district office. They can contact myself or any of the two assistants in my office. And, yeah, anybody really that works in food service you can contact. They bring a check in, and then I hand it off to the school lunch fund. So, I mean, it's any amount, anything. Yep.
Very, very good. Dr. Leck, go ahead.
One more comment. Absolutely, any amount helps. But the other thing that I feel is pertinent to share, while the majority of those funds are used for lunch accounts, a small portion of that is also used to fund our food pantries. We have food pantries at the middle school level and at the high school level. Most of those are the food that is available there is at no cost, but there are times in which there are costs. So it's really only a couple $100s a year probably, but we also use that fund to support that. And so those are community pantries. So any family could access the pantry at the middle school, at the high school. While we don't have one at the elementary level, those counselors do know of the pantries, and they work with families and the counselors at the middle school or the high school to access pantries for students that are at the elementary level. So just wanted to make sure we point that out too, that both of those programs are served by that funding source.
Very good. Any other questions from the board or comments? So, good? Okay. Thank you, Cindy, so much for your report today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to board education, contextual competency review of the state assessment results. Dr. Leck.
Well, thank you. Dr. Young has asked that I provide this. She unfortunately wasn't able to come. Had a different appointment that delayed her ability to be here. And so you do have a copy of that report in your drive, and I will just touch on a few areas. As we go along in this next year, I want to drill down, give it a little more specific in different areas, look at subgroups, that I think those are all areas that the board will be aware. We're looking now, though, just at a district level, at least at the grade level, so really more of a compilation. And I think this data tells us a good story, but at the same time, we want to get into subgroups at a later date, but I don't want to overwhelm you with the data either. But if you look at the ELA, that is the first, and maybe just the key to it is it's all color-coded, and green is good. Green means we're above the state average, and I think that's a very important indicator. We've talked in these annually when we do these that different standards are tested every year. They don't test exactly the same test. Different standards are used, so there's going to be some level of fluctuation even from the test from year to year. But it's important to look at where you sit in comparison to the state. That's an awfully good indicator from a district level comparison. If you look at English language arts, fairly consistently throughout the span of these 5 years, we have been over the state average, and in some cases fairly significantly. If you point out to grade 6 this year, grade 6, grade 10, those are significantly above the state average, but above the state average in all 7 levels that were tested in ELA. So that's 3 through 8 in grade 10. But I attribute a lot of that during this period of time to some of those literacy grants that we have written and received in the last 5 years or so. And I think that's a good indicator that those initiatives have been successful. Moving into math, the outliers here relate to grade 6 in math. This is significantly above the state average there. Also in grade 10, significantly above the state average. We did have one grade level that was below the state average by a few percentage points. That was grade 8 in math, so slightly below. If you look into science, again, this is an area that historically has been quite high compared to the state average. This year, for the most part, is the same. We see that, and I'll point out grades 4, 8, and 11 are tested in science. In that, grade 4 was slightly below the average, which is a bit of an anomaly for what we typically have seen. But that's slightly below the average, 1 percentage point below the average, so almost at the state average. And again, continue to be pretty significantly above the state average in grades 8 and grade 11. If you move into NAEP, maybe the important piece to recognize here is we don't get state level data at the NAEP. You only get state or district level data. You only get state compared to national data, so the S is state. And you see where North Dakota stacks up in reading and math. We test those in grades 4 and 8. They're actually, we are selected, so it's not a requirement, but we're selected every year. So, we always joke about getting that 8th grade letter that says you've been selected for the NAEP. Again, I think we're just of the size that we're always going to be selected, but it is not a mandated, but we're always selected. If you look to the ACT and the work key results, I do want to draw your attention to, and I know we've talked about this at the board level, but we have shifted in the end. The number of students tested is kind of the key indicator here. We shifted as a state away from a requirement for that ACT test. So you can look at that assessment score and say, wow, we really made huge jumps And the reason for that is we're not testing every student any longer, and now they are the students that are opting to take the ACT. So that is going to, you know, by common sense, will tell you that score is going to be higher. You're testing fewer students rather than testing all students. And I would just remind you that we've talked previously, when you look at those state averages, make sure that you're looking at the states that are testing all students or states that are testing some students, or at least the requirement piece, because you'll want to compare us now to states that test only some students, not those that test all, because if you look and you just assume that every state does exactly what we do, we will be inflated in our ranking, just like we were lower than where we should have been if you would compare those to those that test all. So I think it's probably somewhere in the high teens now of states that test all students in ACT. It was 13, I think, 2 years ago, and I guess I haven't looked to see what it is now, since that is no longer what North Dakota does. But I will point out, we did have one student that tested it, that scored a 35. And I will, just to point that out on your assessment. And the work keys, a number of students take the work keys. That is part of criteria for a scholarship. And all of the students that assess that do generally receive the score that they need to meet that criteria. So with that, I would stand for questions. Again, knowing that we'll break down into subgroup data a little bit later in the year.
Oh, Diane, sorry.
Thank you for the information. I had a question about when we were requiring juniors to take the ACT, 197, and then we fall down to 62 this past year, which is well less than half. Yet, I would suspect that many of those students that aren't choosing to take it want to go to college. Is it becoming less common for colleges to require the ACT or to look at it closely?
You know, I think we might have two people that are even more qualified to answer that question than I am.
Well, I have a son that is looking at colleges, and Dan, you can probably chime in as well, but and Aaron, but a lot of the colleges that we're looking at no longer, it's an option, so no longer, and they were probably same colleges that my other older children
Okay.
applied to, and it was required at that time. So I know Dan and Aaron and whoever else has college kids. Yeah, Dan says more for scholarships. Aaron, are you seeing the same thing as well? So, yep.
Do they look at the SAT, or they just don't look at either as much anymore?
The more-
Generally, all of those
Yeah.
assessments have lost,
Okay.
Yeah.
you know, interest at that level for admissions.
Okay.
It is more related to scholarships,
Yeah, as Dan
generally
mentioned,
speaking.
Yeah, more. Gail, go ahead. Yep.
Some very competitive schools will still require an SAT or an ACT, but it's mainly ones that are hard to get into and for scholarship purposes. Yeah, and that was a trend that was kind of just starting when I left, so it was coming. There are, you know, it isn't necessarily the greatest predictor of success once you get to college. There are other things that they look at that correlate much, much higher with being successful at the collegiate level. So,
Thank you. Thanks.
Yep. Go ahead, Gail.
just refresh my memory, what was the year that the state underwent the whole major standards revision? Because I always think to compare after that with testing isn't quite fair either. I thought it was about the year I retired. I think it was 2018. So we had a year of no testing. So these tests that we have reflect those new standards.
Correct.
So I think that the 2 years are probably more accurate, the last 2 years testing with, you know, because it's a whole different, I mean, some of those standards were really ramped up.
Yeah, and they are, and it's easy to look at the numbers. I guess I tend to look more at the state average comparison, just because that, again, the standards change, what they test changes. I think that's a generally speaking, that's a better comparative, is where are you comparing at the state level, but, and then you dig into subgroups, and there's going to be a little bit more that can be gleaned from that. But as a general rule, I would say, as I said before, to keep it simple, the green is good.
Any other questions about the testing scores? Thank you, Dr. Leck, and thank you to Dr. Young for preparing some of that as well, so thank you. And I also want to shout out to our teachers, because these test scores do reflect, we've had some new initiatives, which means work for teachers, but they are effective, and because we're seeing our positive results here, and so especially in the area of literacy. So thank you to all the teachers and paras in the classroom. We appreciate your work. Moving on in our agenda, letter E, Superintendent's Report. Dr. Leck.
So thank you. You have me for a few of these today. You have the personnel updates that we provide at every meeting. You can see the recommendations for hire that'll be coming. I've included exit survey data that was compiled and reviewed, and that includes potential strategies to address any areas of concern, areas of strength that have been targeted. I don't collect this data. The data is collected by Stacy Jampgard, the human resource generalist. She compiles the data, and this is a compilation from Stacy on the exit survey data. One of the areas that I'll be bringing up to you at the next meeting, I just want to, prepare the board for something that we see is coming, is Mr. Gaylor has made a recommendation for an online learning technician that I would like to bring forward to the board. Once you've had a chance to review that, consider the implications. The board is well aware we're struggling with, especially in critical shortage areas, to fill positions. This has particularly been occurring at the high school, and there are some strategies that I think we need to consider that we have considered in the past. Extended contracts, that has been viable to a degree, especially in key areas. There's other areas that don't have departments. They're departments of one, and so if you lose that department, that becomes a big challenge to in a critical shortage area to try to fill that need. And we have a greater propensity for online learning. That's certainly much more prevalent now. So with kind of that underpinning, an online learning technician, as outlined by Mr. Gaylor in his proposal, I think is a really strong one. If you consider our special ed technician, it follows along that same framework of a special ed technician. Somebody that supports online learning. If you've been, well, you were all through the COVID period, and that is certainly not for every learner. But if more opportunities are provided, this online technician position would recognize what more needs to happen for more students to have success in an online environment. Somebody that is with them to monitor classes and making sure they're staying they're being progress monitored, that they're staying on track for success, that they are supporting their learning in an online environment. Beyond that, the position may also have some corollary opportunities to allow for expansion of STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, exploration of opportunities for service learning. Those are additional areas that this position may be able to support. When you've had discussions on choice readiness in the past, one of the reasons that we score so high, the highest in the state on choice readiness, a lot of that has to do with service learning in our requirements and in our push for service learning projects. We would be able to enhance those more if there was a position to support. So I see it as a few different layers. Mr. Gaylor provided this to me. We worked through some things and had greater discussion on them. And I think it's to a place now where, especially given the needs that we have in some critical areas, that this could serve a good need. So I want you to look through that, certainly see if you have questions, but I think there's an opportunity here. The pay structure would look similar as it would to a special ed technician. So that could look differently depending on if this is an individual that has a teaching license, if it is an individual that does not, that is supporting those needs. And again, look to that, that special ed technician as the model for how that would work. But there are a couple of areas that we certainly are concerned about, and that would be egg ed, for example. That's a difficult position to find. We are not graduating those positions, and there, at last look, we're 13 across the state of North Dakota, and we have no new graduates, to my understanding, in that department in the state. I feel we were very, very fortunate to find one last year, and I think we need to be prepared for the potential that we would not have one, to be able to find one now. So it's really about making sure that we can still provide good options to kids and support them along the way. If it's an online option, how are we going to do that? Spanish is another great example where that might be a challenge to find a Spanish teacher. We want to still be able to provide that opportunity, but how can we do that, and how can kids be supported that may not have a proclivity to the online learning environment? If that's the option that we have, we want to make sure that they're supported. And I think this is really an outside-the-box thought process from Mr. Gaylor that I appreciate in recognizing that all of our learners are different. Other area that Adam and I have had Mr. Gaylor and I have had some discussions about, and really a continuation of a lot of the family-friendly discussions we've had in the past and how we can support our teachers, is there potential to offer childcare for staff through our CTC. There's another program in the state of North Dakota that does that. That's in Devil's Lake. And they're able to not compete with the community, because that is absolutely not what we want to do. We don't want to compete with the market. We want to provide an opportunity for our teachers. And so that model in CTC, or in the CTE Center in Devil's Lake, is kind of what we're looking at. I think it would be a great opportunity for our teachers, but it would also provide for some service learning or cooperative experiences for our students. So how that would look, it would be far too fast to accelerate something like this, but maybe next year in the second semester, maybe a year from now, we are talking a little bit more realistically about this. But I just wanted to put it on your radar for awareness. That is something that I think has a real benefit for our staff, and it would be a good opportunity for our kids, and for that work cooperative experience. So. Maybe with those first two items, I'll stand for questions.
Gail.
Would the online component, would that be connected any way with the Blue Jay Academy, or would it be a standalone position, or how would that look?
Well, we don't know yet. That's a great question with our needs in the Blue Jay Academy now. That is certainly possible to merge some of those ideas, although I think again, it just depends on the number of online courses that are necessary, because as I said before, not all students are great fits for online programming. But if more of that is provided for options, then I think we need to have a different opportunity on how we're going to do that and how we're going to support kids. But that's a great insight.
Aaron. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess with the online coordinator position there, I guess this is where I'd like to see, define where are we going to be going with online learning, and is this the right approach for that strategic goal? So until we define that, I'm kind of hesitant to say, yeah, let's go do this, let's go do that. So, getting that definition understood first, I think, is where we need to put the priority. And then, excuse me, this daycare thing, again, along the same lines. I think it's a great idea, but how does it fit, and is it the right idea for what we're trying to achieve at the district level?
Yeah, and perhaps I could have defined that a little bit better with the child care. I'll answer that question first and then get into your other question or other statement. We would be talking about how are we providing this at a budget neutral level, it essentially just be a benefit to staff. How can we do that and still tie into existing programming? That's how I would envision that child care opportunity. Again, not looking to compete with the community, and the community does a great job of providing that, but there are needs. And if there's an opportunity for us to provide that benefit to staff and at a budget neutral level, that has good work experience opportunities for kids. I think that's a win-win-win. With your question related to online, some of this is coming from a place of options. You know, what options do we have? If some of the options are going to be online environment for some of our electives or even some of our core opportunities, if that's the only option we have to look to somebody that's going to support those needs, because that isn't for every kid. And so I understand the desire to have, you know, kind of an umbrella that works over how are we defining where we're going. This is a little bit of triage, though, at the same time. We're triaging what our needs are right now. So I understand the concern long term, but I'm also thinking about what we're going to do right now if we can't find teachers in every one of these options.
And I'm going to comment just real quickly on the child care thing. I also see that also as retention, you know, because it is hard to find child care now. And so if we can retain some staff to make child care, the burden of child care easier on them somehow, I see that as a benefit as well. Go ahead, Gail.
I don't know, is there any kind of state level looking at this greater issue of this teacher shortage? Because we all know from the online days that isn't the number one way that kids learn. And do you think that the people at the state level are keenly aware of this and able to inform our legislature that we are at this danger point in this? I just see so many people leaving the profession, and I'll just get on my soapbox. To me, it's the greatest profession in the world. It's where my passion lies. So,
I would say that collectively, we're more at the problem admiration. We're admiring the problem still. I don't think we're at real solutions yet. Yep. Well, that's the reality. I mean, I'm talking as a state. I'm not talking Jamestown, or I'm just saying as a state, we're still at admiring the problem phase. I'd love to tell you we're at a different place, but that's where we are.
Melissa.
I might be thinking way ahead of where you are with this daycare thing at this point, but just thoughts going through my head are, is that going to be like providing all day childcare, or is it just before, after school? What building are you going to use? How are we going to?
Great questions, all things that we're working through.
There's a lot of state requirements.
Yep.
With how many of each age you can have, and
Yep. Well, and I know that Mr. Gaylor has done a lot more work on this than I have. He's working through the concept. My head's in the clouds, you know, with the idea. He has to do the work. And this is something that is coming from him, I should be very clear, to give him the credit for wanting to provide an opportunity for staff. But the model that exists in other CTC centers is really, you know, what we would be looking to adopt if it's feasible to do that so very early, you know, in the stages of what that might look like. It is simply bringing it up for awareness in the event that you hear, hey, we're talking about these kinds of things, and that you're aware of. These are sometimes, I don't want to say little things, but they are the things that we can do to support the needs of our teachers, our staff, other support staff.
No, Jason? Or was there someone over here? I wanted to. No? Okay. Diane, did you have anything? No? Okay, go ahead, Jason.
And offshooting on the child care, and nothing we can do at this level, but another phenomenon that's occurring with young mothers is once they're ready to head back to their career, it's a big decision. Financially, it's a big decision when you talk about the rule of 90 or wherever we're at now. And I guess I bring that up because I was at some meeting somewhere where that was a concern about how, and it was a pre-legislative meeting, but yeah, I mean, since we're talking to the powers that be here, and I never really thought about that. Well, why wouldn't they come back to teach? Or even if they're taking 2-3 years off to start raising their family, it's not that easy just to jump back in to the teaching profession. So since we're having our dream list here, let's add that to it.
If I can keep going?
Yep.
Okay.
Or, wait, was there anyone over here that had, I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak, so, okay. If not, just keep continuing.
Thank you. And I also want to draw attention to, we have ESSER funding earmarked for that additional counseling position. Mr. Gaylor did a wonderful job of providing some feedback to the board. We are a year away from making that decision. There's still ESSER funding that supports that need. And he's provided some great feedback that shows that need still exists for that additional counseling position. Again, a year to plan, but just wanted to share that feedback with you that has been needed and still continues to be needed at that level. So just sharing that for awareness at this point. A real minor issue, but in my board report, I include that we're going to ask you to open a new checking account, and that's for the transition house, a very small amount. But it's the purpose of that is to give them firsthand experience. And I know it's a minor deal, but if we're opening a new account, really procedurally, that needs to be approved by the board, even if it's a very small amount. We want to make sure that we're doing that correctly. It's not a large impact, but we think it's something that's important that is provided to the transition house students to give them firsthand experience with opening an account, depositing money, using a debit card, budgeting, using digital funds with their business. So just sharing that background so when you act on that later.
Yeah, I just want to comment, I think that's a great idea, it's a great opportunity for the students in the transition house to learn those skills, and if there's other things like that, that we can, it's a little bit out of the box from the different classroom, and so if there's other things we can do to support that, we'd like to hear about. Melissa, did you have a comment?
So will they be using that account then to run their coffee business? Is that what the thought process
Correct.
is on that? Okay.
Yep. And that's really what it would be used for, but it provides a lot of other lessons along the way as they prepare and they're receiving, they could Venmo, for their business, things like that. Next on my report, the transportation bid and agreement. We have worked as a finance committee. You followed that through minutes. You know that we've been meeting regarding continuation of our busing transportation contract. We did receive a 3-year agreement response. We've continued to negotiate with them. Really what we have centered on is a 1-year agreement. And those costs, even at that 1-year agreement, and other finance committee members can share on that, but fairly significant. You're talking a 55% increase of those fees or those costs based on that 1-year agreement. It's significant, but those are the options that we have right now. That's one of the reasons we wanted to look at a 1-year agreement. And there's some other things that we are considering moving forward, but that cost is about $469,000 projected. So a fairly significant increase in cost, but that is assuming we're running the same number of routes last year. Those are all things that strategically we need to consider if we're going to run the same number of routes, what that might look like, who partners with us to receive those, to be on those routes. So those are all things, because right now we do bus non-JPS students. So if we can decrease bus routes, those are all things that we need to consider when you're looking at a 55% increase based on an apples-to-apples comparison. So I don't know if there's anything else Finance Committee members wanted to add.
Thank you to Aaron and Jamie for serving with me on the Finance Committee. Any comments that you'd like to make? Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, just in recognition that we're kind of in a tough situation here. And then as, Dr. Leck alluded to, I think we need to look at some options on, doing things differently for the district, and what that looks like, I don't know. But it's not something we really want to digest long-term. So whatever that ends up looking like, I think we just need to lay a lot of things on the table and take some time and do it.
Jamie, anything? So.
I think we definitely need to come up with a lot of ideas and solutions to this huge problem in our budgetary future here, so.
And busing in the future, may have to look quite a bit different just because of anything close to these costs is still a lot. And when we have this kind of an increase, it was pretty significant. So thank you again for serving on the Finance Committee. You can continue, Dr. Huck.
So with the revised fee schedule, if you just move down my report, a very minor change in the fee schedule that you've already approved, but it allows me an opportunity to kind of just share a little bit more. You know that, and Cindy referenced this earlier with some changes at the state level with free and reduced lunch. It makes the way we used to do fee schedules a little bit confusing for families because now there's going to essentially become 4 categories of free and reduced lunch. And I've outlined them in this is just what I call them. This isn't what anybody else might call them, but I think it's the easiest way to consider it. In the past, we had free, we had reduced, and we had full pay. That's what it used to look like in the old paradigm. Now with the state picking up 200% of poverty, that actually looks a little bit different now. Essentially, we will have no students on reduced anymore. And I'm talking about in how it impacts families. They're still going to be called something, they're still going to be reduced federally, but they're going to be subsidized by the state, the other portion. So essentially, they will become free to them, but we consider them still reduced. So I just want to walk through what these definitions would be. Federal free is no different than what it has looked before, no cost to families. Federal reduced to a family will be no cost because it'll be reduced from the federal level, and then through the state of North Dakota, the remainder of that is going to be free. So free to them, but it's just where that money is going to come from. Part of it's going to come from the state, part of it's going to come from the feds. State free is then anybody else that does not qualify for reduced, but is up to 200% of that poverty level, they will all be free, but all state free. And so those 3 categories all will be free to the family, but we consider it different in terms of when we say what our free and reduced lunch count is. That will be based on federal free, federal reduced. So it gets a little bit confusing, and we felt like if we just included that language in a fee schedule, I don't think anybody would know what they are. Am I free? Well, it's free to me, so am I free? And so we just decided to make it at 50% of the fees and put flat rates. That's just easier for people. Not that that's a big deal that you needed to know more about, but I felt like it was an opportunity for us to talk about those different categories of free and reduced. So questions on that at all?
Jamie.
I know that the poverty level went up, which is a good thing. What do we do to get more families to fill out those forms so they have a possibility of qualifying for some of these categories?
That's a great question. It's the million-dollar question in public education because that is an issue that every school has struggled with for years. I think our food service does a great job of making sure to call families. The reality, though, is in North Dakota, a lot of people don't want that help. They feel like it's an entitlement or a handout, and they, one of 2 things. Sometimes it's they don't know that they could qualify. Sometimes they don't know that the benefit they provide the district, they only see it in terms of themselves. I don't want the help. That's an entitlement program. I don't want that. We see that a lot in North Dakota. We're too proud to take those. But they actually help the district. And that's one of the things that we try to do is communicate to families that the benefit comes to the district. There's an at-risk weight factor that's impacted. So our state funding is impacted by that. Our ability to ask for grants, our ability to get things like our after-school program are all based on federal free and reduced. So those are good things for us. And so it definitely benefits, but the reality is not everybody wants to, or they don't always understand what levels they could actually get to and still qualify. So I don't know if I have an answer to your question other than it's a struggle that every school has. I wish that everybody would fill out a free and reduced lunch. I think we would all be better off.
And I know Amy also does some work with this as well, so thank you. Go ahead, Jamie.
I know that those forms do get mailed to the families prior to school starting. Are they available at back to school nights? I assume that the people are working with the deficits with those forms as well?
Yeah, absolutely, and we will be happy to fill those forms out for people if they want to come in and just sign. We would be happy to do that for people. But again, it just comes down to, do people want to, or do they know what they could qualify for?
Gail?
I would even like to encourage more people to do that, even at the high school level. If they qualify for free or reduced lenses, it can get them free ACT tests, and there are other benefits to it as well. And I think, too, I noticed there was a lot of shame sometimes, and we just need to get rid of that stigma, that it's okay to get that help.
And we do it very confidentially, so if people are interested, just contact someone in the central office or your school principal, counselor. We can help them with that.
Shame is pretty confidential, too.
Yes.
People don't like to admit it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I've had success with is trying to, as I referenced before, trying to make sure that people understand the benefits to others, the benefits to the district of applying. We had a school, Louis L'Amour is a great example that has shifted between being eligible for Title I, eligible for after-school programming, and not over my time here. And that has to do with a handful of applications. Huge benefits to the district. And even if that's how it's framed and thought about, is what is the benefit to the district? That's a benefit. That is a positive thing for us. Just moving on my report, Enrollment Facilities Task Force will present on June 19th, so that is coming up. Mr. Ryan Hardy, Mrs. Bree Sorensen will be here to represent the task force and present their findings. Approval to submit the consolidated application. I explained that that's really follows along some deadlines that we have. In some years, we may have that available for you. In some years, we won't. This is a year that it always gets approval from the board before it's submitted, but the deadline to submit is in August. The request they provide is we have to have approval to submit in June. So kind of a goofy timeline that they have, but that's the reason why it's set up like that. So with that, I'll stand for any other questions.
Any questions from the board? Any questions regarding Dr. Luck's report? Okay. If not, moving forward in the agenda, F, nothing under old business. G, under new business, nothing under activities, buildings and grounds, or curriculum assessment and instruction. Number 4, finance. A, approval of textbooks for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail. Second by Jamie. We have a motion and a second for approval of textbooks for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Any discussion? Any discussion? So we have a motion and a second for approval of textbooks for the 2023 to 2024 school year. There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. B, approval of budget revisions and subsequent number 1 executive summary. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron to approve. Is there a second? Second by Dan. We have a motion and a second for approval of budget revisions and subsequent executive summary. Any discussion? Any discussion? Would anyone like Christy to review it? Any discussion? Okay. If not, we have a motion and a second for approval of budget revisions and subsequent executive summary. Assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. C, approval of bid for bus contracting and corresponding agreement. Is there a motion? A motion by Diane. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. We have a motion and a second. Christy, I'll probably do roll call on this one since it was a bid. Approval of bid for bus contracting and corresponding agreement. Any discussion? If not, oh, Jason, go ahead.
So this is current would be, oh, okay, never mind. I'm sorry. I read the years wrong. This is a 1 year.
1 year, yep.
1 year agreement. And this is not negotiable? Or we've exhausted those?
This is negotiated.
I just wanted to.
Yep, good question, Jason. Yep, good question.
Concerns are understood and shared.
Yeah. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote for this. Christy, whenever you're ready.
Jamie Bear. Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Dan Tweeten.
Yes.
Gail Nelson. Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Heidi Larson.
Yes.
Diane Hansen. Melissa Gleason. And Steve Feldkamp.
Motion was unanimous. It's approved. Moving on, D, approval of revised 2023 to 2024 fee schedule. Is there a motion? Motion by Jamie. Is there a second? Second by Steve. We have a motion, a second for approval of the revised 2023 to 2024 fee schedule. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Under personnel. A, approval to open a Dean of Students position available to JPS teachers. Dr. Luck, would you like to talk about this before we move into some discussion on this?
Sure, thank you. You do have a board memo. It is Board Memo 96. And I'll just kind of walk through, use this plan as a framework, and if you have questions as I go along, please feel free. But really what this memo does is provide rationale and an action plan to create, I'm kind of using synonymously Dean of Students Administrative Intern Program. Dean of Students are not atypical to use. The one maybe difference between these two, at least the Dean of Students positions that I'm familiar with, is they're often paid on a teacher schedule, and that's not what I would recommend to do. I think the responsibilities that would be inherent within them would denote a pretty significant difference in my mind between a Dean of Students, but that's probably the most transferable term that people would understand using the position, so I'll probably just call it a Dean of Students as we work through. So the rationale, action plan to do that, I think it's important to remember when we had this initial conversation, when Dr. Young resigned to take a great opportunity. Again, thank her for her service. She's done a wonderful job for the district, a wonderful job for Washington, a great advocate. The question was asked at that time, and I think it was Mr. Rohr, what's the intention? Because we've had conversations in the past about what is it that we want from an administrative footprint. And pretty definitively, my response at that time, and that was fairly, as a collective, was pretty uniform. The desire is to have a full-time person. That would be the intention. We went through the same process that we have used for other administrative positions in this year. We had an elementary opening, a multi-section building in Roosevelt. We went through this exact same process. We opened the position, interviewed candidates, and in this situation we offered. The intention was to fill that position as it was intended by the board, as it was intended by me. Unfortunately, the candidate that was offered declined, wanted to stay in the current position that he was at. The other finalists for the position are not at a level yet in which I feel like they would be appropriate candidates, don't have a level of experience or just aren't quite ready yet. And I want to be clear to say that I feel like it's yet to be a building principal on their own without some levels of support. So that makes me think about two things. There's been a couple conversations that have happened throughout the years with internal candidates. We have had, in my 10 years here, 11 administrative openings. 6 of those have been filled by external candidates. 5 of those have been filled by internal candidates. All of the internal candidates have not had, including the most recent hire at Roosevelt, don't have experience, administrative experience. We hire them from within, from teaching positions, instructional coach positions, and they transfer in and they gain that experience. But we consider, do they have the correct skill set? Do we know enough about them? Have they been trained? Do they have the right fit to be able to be successful in that position? So that's one important piece. But when I've talked with other internal candidates in the past, those that have not been selected, I've heard a few different things. One has been, I'm not sure if that's what I want to do or not. I know I love teaching in the classroom. And let's be really clear, we have really, really amazing teachers. That was referenced earlier in our assessment. We have great teachers that are very, very knowledgeable in their roles and are wonderful professionals. Some of those classroom teachers have a desire to consider administration. Some do not, and some don't know. And so that's one group of people that I'm thinking about, you know, when we have this kind of an opportunity. It's those people that are really, really good in the classroom. They're not sure if they want to leave their current position and take a risk and go to another building potentially, or into another position and take on a different responsibility. And the answer to that oftentimes is no. I feel safe in what I'm doing, and I don't want to explore that opportunity. I'm kind of intrigued by it, but I'm not ready to make that jump yet. So there's that group. There are some that have been internal candidates, have not, maybe don't have all of that attributable leadership experience, and they don't advance in the process because they don't have that leadership experience, but they also don't want to move. They don't want to move to Montpelier, for example, and get that few years of experience. I've had that question asked to me from internal candidates a few times. Do I have to leave here to go to get that experience to come back? And my answer is always no, because I think, you know, that's not necessarily what we're looking for. We're looking for the right fit. Sometimes that's somebody with experience. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's an external candidate. Sometimes it's an internal candidate. But my concern is somebody that feels like they can't get or showcase their leadership experience here. So this kind of melds that idea of, is this exploratory? Is there a way that we can provide an exploratory opportunity for our existing staff? And is there a way that we can build capacity in educational leaders that want to pursue or want to explore the administration, the position in administration? So that's kind of where this idea comes from, but it was expedited a little bit because we don't have viable candidates. I think the intention was very obvious and very clear. If a candidate existed that had accepted, that's what you would be approving tonight. You would be approving a candidate that is a fit for the position. But I find it to be that I would be negligent to you if I brought a candidate that was not ready yet, or that I did not feel could fulfill those responsibilities to any administrative position. That's not an appropriate response. That's negligent of me. And so this is a middle ground opportunity to do a few things. Build a cadre of professionals that come from our teaching staff that could grow into those positions, gain experience. We would have a year of understanding, and so would they. Is this position for me? And do I have those skills necessary to advance? And I'm not suggesting, I want to be really clear, that this would be only people from this program would be hired in these positions in the future. That's not at all what I intend. I would still want to open it up at the same way that we open up every other position and attract the best people. And if that is an external candidate, that's who we would recommend for hire. If it's an internal candidate, we would know them a lot better if they were a part of this program. And that's really all we're trying to do, is to address this issue now. The reality is we had 5 candidates in Roosevelt when we hired for Roosevelt. We had less than that in Washington. The candidate pool is much, much smaller than it was even a few years ago. When we have hired elementary principals in the past, Mr. Anderson, he was an internal candidate with no experience. Mr. Delzer, he was an external candidate with no experience. Mrs. Anderson, she was an internal candidate with no experience. We were very fortunate to have Dr. Saxberg come back to the district. Actually, he was a finalist for the superintendent position. He came back to the district and served for a few years, very, very experienced. But that's an outlier. Typically, what we have been finding for hire are those that are just coming into the position. And that's the environment that we are hiring in. It is not intentionally, let's not hire an experienced person or let's not hire a full-time person. It is the reality of the pool that we have. So this is a solution to address a problem. It is not the only way to look at the solution. It is the solution that we have. So just to understand the process that we used or that I used to consider this, I talked to teachers from single-section buildings, from multi-section buildings, principals from both single-section and multi-section, previous internal candidates who gave me great insight onto what they felt as internal candidates, those that received the position and those that did not. I talked to the Education Association. I talked to school board members that were part of the process as well. And through that discussion, the idea kind of went from an idea into something a little bit more tangible that from the individuals that I spoke with felt was a very reasonable rationale and a reasonable application for this kind of an idea. So to give an overview of how I envision the program working, so if it's approved, the position will be open up to all teachers licensed at the elementary level that hold a graduate degree. You know, we have lots of training programs in education. We put 20-year-old students in undergraduate degrees in charge of classrooms for weeks at a time. And what we're talking about is a graduate degree, an experienced educator that works in our district, that knows our kids, somebody that holds a graduate degree, and serving underneath an experienced administrator for the course of a year. During that time, they would get feedback. They would have some level of assistant principal level responsibilities, but all working under the control, under the guidance of an experienced principal. So they would serve in that position for a year. They would gain experience. They would understand, is this a position I want to pursue? From a district standpoint, we would get, over the course of years, a number of people that would have that level of experience. We would know these internal candidates extremely well. If they are in which areas and positions they would best be suited for. The idea would be to, at the end of every year, that we would open this position up again and others would have that same opportunity. Again, working underneath, though, a building principal, that they would not be solely in control of a building. They would provide the level of coverage that would be necessary to address the day-to-day operations. They'd be very managerial at first, but also be working in support of, or with the support of the building administrator. I thought about the risk, though, from a teacher standpoint. There's a couple comments that when I talk to potential internal candidates or people that have expressed interest in the past, and one of the things that came through is people were concerned about leaving their position like a leave of absence. You know, if I was teaching third grade in Roosevelt, being concerned about, well, I'd take this opportunity for a year and that's great, but then I'm placed in kindergarten at Gustner because that's the only opening that exists. Because that's what would happen in a leave of absence, right? And so it would work the opposite of that. They would be guaranteed to have the position that they left. So if that third grade teacher in Roosevelt, they would have that position back. The other person hired to replace them for that year, that's the person who would have to move. Because this is from my perspective, this is a shared opportunity, and a leave of absence is a request that's made of us. So to continuing contract rights. So that would be one significant difference. I referenced this earlier, there's a different level of responsibility that comes with the Dean of Students position. And I know in other districts it's simply it's kept on a teacher's schedule. So if by the teacher schedule you make $55,000, that's what the Dean of Students makes. I would envision that being different. I think it should be because of the responsibilities, the extended contract that would occur. They would work the same contract term as the building principal at the elementary level would. So I am suggesting that would be paid at a separate agreement. That's their teaching contract, so they would still hold a teaching contract, and then an additional stipend of $20,000 to account for the different responsibilities that occur that are administrative. So I thought about a few different ways to implement that. Like I thought about, should there be a cap? If it's $75,000, or if you make more than that with the $20,000 bump, so get one or the other, whichever's higher. But the concern that came up as I talked with people about that was, well, that would mean somebody with less experience gets more than somebody with the same level, than with more experience. And so with that, as I talked this through, it seemed the most reasonable to just say, take what you're at, teaching contract, add another agreement, that's $20,000. That way everybody's treated the same for those responsibilities. So you're looking at the additional, not the total cost. So that's one thing that I worked through a little bit with some help from different individuals. The reason that we looked at Louis L'Amour, that's another single section building. Without assistant principals, it becomes pretty challenging to bring an intern and share that position between two multi-section building principals. So if you consider that intern would be in multi-section buildings instead of single section buildings, now you have one principal in charge of 4 sections with an intern. This would be really equalizing the responsibilities in terms of total number of students and total number of staff between the 2 single section buildings. So it would be consistent with the total staffing outlay, total student outlay of any of our other 3 multi-section buildings. I think very clearly that Mr. Delzer would do a great job. I believe it would be fairly easy to ensure coverage just by a schedule. When Mr. Delzer is in Washington, the intern or the dean of students position would be in Louis L'Amour. I mean, I don't think you'd see any more loss of coverage than you might see in a typical year. You have a meeting down at central office, and so those individuals are going to be gone. They're out at a professional development. I think you'll actually have a way to manage that in a better way because you're sharing those positions. And I actually think there would be an increased benefit to that. And while I'm talking about elementary, I think there's a long-term opportunity for us to look at the secondary level. We have secondary teachers as well that don't feel like they have those training opportunities, don't have those exploratory opportunities. And if there's a way to do this at the secondary level, I think that builds capacity in our teachers. Again, a lot of this is just about providing opportunities to our existing staff to explore this opportunity. So at the end of the day, that is what I feel. I think it provides some real-world administrative resume building experience for them. From a district perspective, it addresses the concerns of appropriate staffing and coverage, but it also builds that cadre of trained individuals that could fill that position. That is my recommendation, and I would certainly stand for questions.
I'm sure we'll have some good discussion on this, and so we'll start with Jamie. Go ahead.
So say a teacher, 3rd grade teacher takes this opportunity, and I know that they have the opportunity to go back to their 3rd grade job if this is not for them. Doesn't that just open us up to have to hire another teacher, fill that position, and then we're hiring a brand new teacher, but saying, well, if you like this, too bad, you might have to move because if someone wants to come back, that's our priority. I don't know that is great for retention for new teachers or new hires. I look at that as kind of a downfall. I don't
Sure.
know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I understand that. That's, with a leave of absence, we do the opposite of that. But no, I completely understand that. And it would, luckily, we're a large enough district that we have attrition throughout the course of the year, and you're probably not doing a reduction in force. But the position would be, and sometimes we have those. We hire positions that sometimes have fluidity. And we never hire, hey, you're a 3rd grade teacher at Roosevelt. That's the position that they're placed in. But we would be very upfront with new teachers saying, well, this is a 1-year position. After this year, there would be a transition to a different position, potentially. And they would have those opportunities as internal candidates to be moved. Certainly understand your concern, But, you know, when we have 9 sections in an elementary, we've hired people that have moved from first grade to second grade to third grade to fourth grade. And sometimes those things happen. But yeah, that would be a trade-off we would have in terms of opportunity. But I would rather do that than not provide an opportunity for our existing staff that want to consider these opportunities.
Aaron?
Just a question on some logistics and how many candidates would you consider every year, and then how would you look at selecting those candidates for this type of program?
That's a great question. We would do it just like we would any interview process. My vision for this, at least in year 1, would be to open it up to any elementary level individual, and I would have an informational meeting, but we would select it. We would bring that position here to the board, that individual to the board, but we would do an interview process just like we would any other situation, have a team of individuals that would ask questions, determine the fit, and that's the individual that we would put in place. But it would come through to the board still.
Thank you, and I appreciate all the good information because I've got some questions on this, and I appreciate your thorough explanation. Melissa first, then Jason.
I'm just wondering if it has been looked at to maybe move the, say, assistant principal into the full-time principal position and have that internship be in a building where there's already a principal and they would act as the assistant, so that you still have a full-time principal in each of the schools.
Yeah, we don't have an elementary level assistant principal, so there isn't really a fit for that. Although I think that if we did, that would be the place that would work best. But we don't have those positions. Maybe I'm not understanding your question.
I was thinking like from the middle school or the high school, taking one of those assistants and putting an intern into that position.
I would see those as separate. The skills to be a secondary principal are different. The needs are different. In some cases, the training is different at a secondary level. I would want to separate those two between an elementary level, somebody that would be impacted at K through 5, and then somebody that would be a position that would impact 6 through 12. So I would not advise taking a secondary principal and providing that opportunity, assuming that they would be an elementary level person.
Jason?
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around a few things here. The first thing would be I'm struggling to see how placing an intern, whatever we want to call it, dean of students, with no experience in any, how that is better than somebody that you refer to as not quite ready yet. You mentioned that we have internal candidates that you don't really feel are quite ready yet. How is this Dean of Students experience a better alternative than that?
I certainly wouldn't call it an experiment. I think like I said earlier, I think the model that we use in education has traineeship types of opportunities. We have student teachers every year, often less trained than our experienced teachers, but this individual will work underneath a building principal. They would not be responsible for everything that a building principal is responsible for. They would work alongside the building principal. They would not be the sole decision maker or the decision maker. They would work underneath that principal. That principal would make that. They might be involved in some triage situations. They'd be able to provide some support for, but placing an individual that is not credentialed or not ready in a position would be far different than placing them underneath the umbrella of an experienced administrator.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I understand that that would be the scenario, but reality says, and history has said, that we've got a lot of needs at Washington, and I think they're needs that we can't overlook. I wish we weren't in this position either. I think one of the, there are some intensive intervention things going on in all of our buildings, and I think all of our students deserve a full-time principal. I understand that we're talking about a shrinking pool of people. I understand that. And I think that's another issue that we don't need to talk about here, but I think we need to start asking ourselves as a district, we're still a Class A school. And I'm not saying that that's, that everyone wants to come to Class A school, but we should be able to attract candidates to positions like this. I firmly believe that. And yes, statewide, we're probably seeing fewer and fewer ed administrators, no doubt about it. But one of my larger concerns is why are we not getting those applications for those who want to, like the candidate who turned us down, that kind of thing. I just still have, I mean, I understand the scenario, I understand the struggles. I would just really have a hard time, and I understand the mentor, working underneath, but we've been down the road before where they're scheduled to be here at one point and then something happens, and that never seems to really work either. I appreciate all the effort put into this. I would encourage us not to give up on finding a full-time principal. Mr. Delzer was hired in the middle of the summer. And so I just don't, I love the concept for future. I'm just not quite ready to give up on the Washington position yet. I just think there's still too many needs there, and they need a full-time leader there, in my opinion.
Aaron?
Yeah, I was just making sure, when we put the motion forward here, that we're clear on what it is exactly we're trying to drive to. Is it possible, in your opinion, to decouple this program from what we need to do with Washington? Can that be two separate directions that we go? So we can, I like this program. I think it's great for career progression, and there's a lot of good things with it. But I don't know that it needs to be coupled tightly to what we do with Washington. So if you could maybe just comment on that.
So it would be a new position then, is what you are suggesting, that it would be a separate position, or that we would increase the, the administrative FTE, essentially, is what you are asking about. That's certainly, when I brought the recommendation forward, it is assuming no change, because that's what I feel is appropriate for me, to bring forward no budgetary impact. That's certainly possible to do that, and we could continue to look for another position. The reality is I think that's wishful thinking, that there is somebody that has not applied yet that would apply. But that's certainly possible. I would have, no disagreement that it could be separate from, but I do wonder, from a contingency standpoint, what is the next strategy if we don't find somebody that, because I will not bring forward a candidate that I do not feel can do the job. That's negligent of me to bring forward somebody that I don't feel like can uphold the responsibilities, that is not ready to do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you could if the board is willing to
Aaron,
provide
go
an
ahead.
increase to that.
Go ahead and finish the follow-up, Aaron.
Yeah, so there would be a financial impact to the district if we were to go down that contingency path approach, and whether or not we want to accept that would be the question then.
Correct.
Yep.
Gail?
Just looking at this, and when in the thing it said viable candidates, I'm concerned if these are people that we have within our staff right now who have admin credentials, are they being worked with so they understand what would make them viable? Or is this a situation where if they are continually rejected, we risk losing them? And I don't know, because I don't know if they were from here or not here, but I think we would owe it to that person or those people to let them know why they were not viable and what they need to become viable. It's just a courtesy. The other thing is, do we have a number of people who have the admin credential at the elementary level who could do this? Would we be giving preference to somebody who already has that admin credential? And could this person be filled by somebody who interviewed, but like you said, isn't viable yet at this moment, but with mentoring could be?
Yeah,
That's a lot there, sorry.
Yeah, there's a few layers to the question there, but I meet with internal candidates that that are not that are interviewed that are not selected, or that apply that are not selected. I meet with them and talk through. This is what I see. This is what needs to occur yet. So I think we have a pretty open conversation about that, and I think I agree with you, Gail. I think that's very important to, when you have internal candidates, that you're willing to have that conversation for growth. Any individual that would have that degree would be eligible, or have a master's degree would be eligible to be considered, not just those that have a credential. That's just they wouldn't need a credential to pursue this. If they have a credential, that would certainly be great, but you can get a provisional credential with that master's degree. So as long as they can get the provisional credential, they would be considered.
Yeah, it was a discussion I had with Dr. Luck. We have to make sure that they have a master's degree to apply for this, because that's a long ways for the qualification. So once you have a master's degree, that process is fairly simple to apply for that provisional. So Dan, I think, was ready.
So ultimately, we're going to need a solution for Washington, and I think this is a good way to do it. The question I have is, how long does it take to spool up? Because obviously, I think we would rather have a full-up principal with experience in there. How long will this take to spool up if we don't find somebody?
I think the concern is less selecting the candidate than to find the candidate that's going to replace that position. So say it's the third grade teacher wants to take that opportunity as long as you wait. I see Aaron's solution as the only alternative solution, would be a commitment to do this regardless if. Well, the solution Aaron brought forward as the only other viable solution, that would be, do you separate the two ideas, continue to look for one, and use that as the contingency option if you don't find another. But I would not want to wait much longer. We've already heard how we struggle to find classroom teachers, even at the elementary level. Looking in June would make it even more challenging to fill that spot. And so then we could be in a position where we don't have classroom teachers. We need that intern to fill, or that dean of students to fill that third grade position, and now we're sharing a principal between, two single section buildings, which is obviously what we do not want.
So our risk is if we keep it open, we don't find anybody, versus starting the process now and having somebody who is
Correct. Correct. If we were in this position at the same timing as the Roosevelt opening, I would not feel a level of urgency, the same level of urgency that I feel now.
Diane, go ahead.
First, I want to say I commend you for the creativity and outside of the box thinking that this took. I feel like we are really onto something here. I agree with Aaron that perhaps someday we'll have it as a separate program, but for now we need to solve the Washington problem. So I have two questions. Why is the candidate that might come forward for the internship or the dean of students, why can't we reach into the middle school for that candidate? Why do they have to be an elementary school teacher?
Elementary, it certainly could be a middle school person. It could be.
Depending on their training.
And the second thing is, I would like you to address Mrs. Christensen's concerns, because I thought they were valid. I want to hear about when Mr. Deltzer is coming to Washington because the Dean of Students is having trouble. And I want to hear about the logistics of what this intern will be asked to do, because I agree with her that Washington is a vulnerable population and a special place, and they deserve a full-time principal, but we are between a rock and a hard place. So I'd like to hear how you would address her concerns, if you would, please.
Sure. So you have the issue of coverage, and I think you have the issue of decision-making that I see as separate things. The coverage could be scheduled. If Mr. Delzer is, just to make it easy, Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday is at Louis L'Amour, and Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday is at Washington. Just say that's the example. Yeah, the scheduling is easy. When one person is one place, the other is the other. In terms of decision-making, that's where the separation would be. If an emergent issue occurs, that would be addressed, no matter the day, of whoever is sitting in that office. But that would look different if it's the Dean of Students as opposed to Mr. Delzer. If it's Mr. Delzer, emergent issue, you go and address the issue. If it is the Dean of Students, you go and address the issue to triage it, but you first call Mr. Delzer and say, hey, FYI, we have this issue. I need you to come over to Washington. I'm in room 206. And so you make a phone call. This is, we're still a pretty close community. It would not take long to get over. Dean of Students would be able to triage the situation until Mr. Delzer is able to be there. Then in actuality, you have two administrators over there to help to deal with that emergent issue. So that's how I would envision that working. Hopefully I answered your question.
You did, and one other question I have is, was Mrs. Christensen on target that this is absolutely the least desirable place that we could be doing this?
I think some of those are perspective level, responses. I don't know if I could answer that question, but I would say I'm looking in terms of what's the most reasonable in terms of single section versus multi-section. It'd be really challenging to partner that with a multi-section building. The concept as it sits in this proposal as a replacement for, not an FTE increase. Now, if you're looking at an FTE increase, it would make sense to use that assistant principal in a few different places, or that dean of students in a few different places, and you could look at need, and that could be Washington and Roosevelt, or that could be other places. But I think it's been very clear that the board and what we have attempted to do is find single section building principals. We just have not been able to find that position. And my concern is doing nothing just makes the solution harder to find a month from now.
And finally, I think Dan's point is very well taken. We have to do something tonight, because whichever path we take, time is ticking.
Jamie?
I love this idea and this proposal, and like Erin said, I think it would be something that would be so great for our teachers to have some administrative, experience in this capacity. I am concerned about, I know with the split time, ideally, yes, you would have one here and one there, but how does this new person get trained in and deal with these problems when there's no experienced principal in the building with them, because their time is split? And then my other concern is, are teachers going to be supported, as well as they should during this? If we have a dean of students or, the principal missing out of, Louis L'Amour School, or are those teachers lacking support from their principal too? So I understand our time crunch, and it is a little bit scary. Everything's a little bit scary here, no matter what direction we take, but I do see some major concerns, and I understand the community's concerns about having a full-time principal in their school. Like Washington is a very high-needs school, and they do deserve a principal. Their teachers deserve a principal, as well as their students. So it is tough to kind of figure out what the best solution is. And yeah, time is ticking, but I do have some concerns about the time management with the two, one actually properly being trained with them being in separate buildings anyway.
Gail, go ahead. Oh, Dan, go ahead, Dan.
I'll tentatively throw this out there. Is there any benefit to having two potential deans of students that would handle the coverage issue, but I know it would add more to Mr. Delzer's workload, but I don't know if that addresses the coverage issue that seems to be coming up.
I hadn't really considered having two, and then, that just, it certainly would be a greater option. You'd be providing two, and probably somebody to address Jamie's, you could be working with Mr. Delzer, and then other providing some coverage. It's just a cost issue. It's similar to the other idea of continuing to hire one and then have that. You could, over time, build that into a floating position. You make it available at the elementary level for a year, make it available in the secondary level for a year, and you're covering both. But certainly could see that as an option if that's the desire.
It would be a year-to-year cost, so that would be I'm much more comfortable with one-time costs versus built-in costs. Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, just along those lines, then, just so I understand, this would just be a one-year position, so we would have to look at filling this position again, or for the next year, or what?
You would, as a district, we would look at it every year. I mean, the intention would be to provide a perpetual program.
Right, I'm
that could
talking
do
about
that.
the position, a permanent position at Washington.
Yeah,
We would still need to pursue that.
It depends on how you want to address the issue. If you want to use this as a strategy long-term, if you want to use it as a strategy for a year, assess how it worked. I think there's a lot of different options that you could look at if you're assuming that this is a singular FTE and you're not recommending changes to FTE. If you're recommending changes to FTE, administrative FTE, then that additional dean of students could be a floating position between elementary and secondary, depending what your needs are, depending what your interest is. You could open it up K-12 and say, anybody that wants to pursue this, the person you select is where we would place them. If that's a secondary person that applies and then we would move them at a secondary level. So that's how I would see, hopefully I'm making sense, that's if you're hiring an additional intern position. But if you're looking to, right now, that would be the solution right now. At just keeping FTE the same would be at Washington. You'd have to assess it after a year. I mean, the hope would be you could perpetuate, that would be a long-term solution, but if it is not, we would continue to open.
Because there would be potential that person who's in this one-year position would want to make it permanent.
Yes.
Yeah.
They could, yep. If that's the right fit, and we know, we know that as we look through our administrative team, we can look and see when, there might be some folks that are leaving, retiring at some point in the future, and that just gives us that that group of people to build from.
To build on what was just said, I would feel more comfortable if we sought someone who is definitely very interested in moving into an administrative position so that this isn't just a temporary solution, but a more permanent one. I also wonder, I know just because I went to graduate school, that many of those courses that they take, like research methods and statistics, are going to cross over. What would be the difference, let's say, for someone who is coming in with a curriculum and instruction background, who would try to pick up an admin? Are they looking at a huge cost because graduate school isn't cheap? Would we be looking at, like we've done in the past, where we help that person obtain that education, or is that off the table? Some questions like that, because I don't want this to just be a revolving door for this building. I think that would be the absolute worst thing for that school. I want someone who really is passionate about maybe becoming an administrator, or someone who we had in the candidate pool who just needs some mentoring to get there, because the idea that changes a lot is bad for the staff, the families, and the students.
Sure.
We want somebody who's going to commit to that building. So I think it's very important that we seek that right candidate.
Understood. I wouldn't envision the district necessarily paying for those additional classes, but with a graduate level, they could receive a provisional license, which would give them 2 additional years to take on those additional. It depends on what their degree is in to determine, what additional coursework they would need to take. But it would not be a separate master's degree. It would be a series of classes that allow them to receive their professional credential. So a manageable course load over the course of 2 years.
Steve?
Does the Teacher Leadership Academy delve into admin at all? If it doesn't, maybe it would at some point. But this has been addressed already, I think. But what would you expect that the candidates that just weren't quite ready would apply for this position? And then what do you think the likelihood is that that whoever is hired would apply to be the principal, like for that continuity and even for the teacher that fills their position?
So I appreciate the question about the Teacher Leadership Academy. We are developing teacher leaders. Some of those want to pursue and become administrators, but it is not a requirement. We don't have it is a degree in educational leadership, but it is not a principal pipeline program. I think that is the antithesis of what I want that program to be. I want it to be about building capacity in teachers to be leaders in their position. That leadership isn't the name on your door. It's what you do with the opportunities that you have. So some of those individuals may be interested in being principals, and they would certainly be good candidates for that. But others will not. They don't have that interest, and that's not the reason they became TLA members. They just wanted to expand their leadership opportunities. But it's certainly available for some. I'm struggling to remember your other questions.
As am I. Well, just the continuity of the
Yeah. The candidates that weren't selected, they certainly could apply, and they would be considered. There might be others, though. There's some that don't apply for positions because they're not sure if that's what they want to do. They have a passion for it, but it's a risk for them. So or it might not. That might not be the right time for them to make that long-term decision, but a short-term, year-long opportunity, they would see that differently. So I would want to open it up to anybody that is elementary eligible to apply, and then we'd make a decision based on who's the right person.
Yes, I think we should open it up to, if we go this route, I think we should open it and just, we don't want to discount anyone because they didn't apply. So go ahead, Steve.
Can you talk a little bit about the rationale for the 20,000? I'm just curious if we could potentially have a candidate that's a long tenured teacher that would end up making more than a credentialed admin at this point.
That wouldn't happen in this, and that is a part of that. I felt like that was at the cap of what, at least close to the cap of what that would be with our highest paid teachers and our lowest paid administrators. So it's kind of it's strategically selected.
Which is, our teachers, that have a lot of experience, becoming a principal doesn't, where the low principal and the high teacher, there is that gap isn't as big as sometimes we might think, and so I think that was the wise choice, was to look at that gap and place that appropriately. I think we do talk a lot about retention here, and I think that this is an opportunity to maybe retain some of our individuals that might be interested in a leadership role such as this. So I'd like a little more discussion. Jason, go ahead. Yeah.
Question, clarification. So someone who's enrolled in a graduate program, they would need to be credentialed. But what if they're enrolled with a year left? and they're working towards the graduate.
That's a great question. My initial my initial thought on it is I would want somebody that's completed the degree. Is it possible that we could consider somebody that does not yet, because they don't need it to be a dean of students, they don't need that credential? Perhaps, if it's a certain situation, maybe, but I would say, generally speaking, we would ask them to have that graduate degree. I just hesitate to say never, but it would be a high bar, I think.
I think having the experience as a teacher and then that graduate degree is going to go a long ways in making that individual qualified for this position. Some more thoughts on, yep, go ahead.
Can I have one more? Feeding on some of or following through on some of the other conversation that's had, I would potentially suggest this option, that we continue to leave the position open at Washington, that you created a dean of students position that could float between secondary and elementary, depending on the need. We look for in this year that position would be in elementary, and that would be our solution if we do not find a candidate at Washington for this year, with the understanding that would be an additional cost to the district. You would be creating a new position, essentially. So that's to me, those are your options. I don't know what the better option is. I see benefits to both. I see concerns with both.
What are the board's thoughts on that? As far as creating this dean of students or growing our own opportunities, I am all on board with that. However that looks, I'm on board with that. I'm on board with even both levels. I just feel like it's a great opportunity to grow our own who want to live in Jamestown, that like it in Jamestown, like our school district, and are interested in staying here. So however that looks this next year, I think we need a little more board discussion on that, but just in general, I think that this is, growing our own is a good thing for retention also. Go ahead, Gail.
My major concerns would be cost, adding that much extra, especially when we really want to provide for and take care of the staff that we have right now.
Yep.
I think that would be my number one concern about this. I think we need to compensate the people we have right now well.
Go ahead, Jason.
Not sure if I should go down this road, and I'm not sure where we're at with the hiring of our continuous improvement person.
Waiting for this position. I'm doing one at a time.
Okay. Just throwing out there the concept of in-house at Washington, and I don't know who's going to apply, but I guess what I'm trying to say is we've tossed around before, an in-house person at Washington who serves as principal, but does that roll out of that office also?
Really depends on the individual that you hire and their credential level.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead, Steve.
I have a lot more confidence in this plan, I guess, than when I got here, just with the idea that we potentially would hire a person that we just decided was not quite ready, but neither we or them are locked into that position. We both have the opportunity to back out with no consequence.
Dan.
Am I right in assuming that it'll probably be easier to find somebody to fill this position than it would be to find a full principal, with the idea if we kept both paths open, whichever got filled first is the path we go?
Yeah, I think this one would be quicker because you're talking internal candidates that are already here.
So if we go down this path, it's de facto, it's very likely this will be the path that we would take as a solution for Washington.
That's why,
Yeah.
to be honest, that's why the recommendation is originally what it was, is this seems the most viable in a fairly urgent situation.
Jason?
Last thing I'll say, I promise. That's a good point, but I'm not ready to give up on the principal idea yet, or the position yet. I think we can be just as aggressive in seeking out an administrator. I'm open to whatever, but I just really would like us to maybe aggressively seek another administrator.
Diane?
And do you mean coinciding with trying to hire a dean of students, or do that first and then fall back on this plan?
I understand the expense concern of doing both, and I understand the time crunch. Yeah, I mean, I would like to see us aggressively seek out a candidate for administration first. If we're maintaining that it would be relatively simple to fill the dean of student position, not simple, because that could have a trail effect of, well, we got to have another teacher, then I think that bodes for the argument that we give the admin a little more time to fill that position.
Gail?
I think I like Dan's idea of having the two paths going, and whichever one gets to the finish line first might be the winner, that we haven't given up on the principal. You know, maybe by some miracle we'll get an applicant the next day, but we have the other path kind of started. And, you know, we could say to those people applying, this is exploratory based on us not being able to fill this. I mean, it could be very clear in that. So it's clear that our priority is a principal, but our second priority is having somebody in that building to serve the children, the families, and the staff.
Yep, just one second. I'm just going to look at the calendar here, and it is June 5th, so looking at, and then Dr. Luck, you can, just kind of thinking about, in my mind, I was thinking about timeline of posting, interviewing, those kinds of things, but Dr. Luck, you can comment. But I just opened my calendar started counting weeks here. And
Yeah, I think it's very clear which option is going to be filled. You know, if we're going down that road and saying leave both open until one is filled, I'm going to tell you right now which one that's going to be. It's going to happen relatively quickly. It's going to be the dean of students. If that's, I think you just want to be clear about that then. I wouldn't leave it and say, well, you know, an experienced candidate or whatever that ideal candidate looks like, the position's been open. It's probably, I mean, let's be honest, to think that anything else is going to happen is probably wishful thinking. So I guess if we're going to go down that road, I think you just say this is what we're going to do, because that's what's going to happen. Because the turnaround on that is not going to be, you know, very challenging. And we could make that work in a week. And you could have that recommendation on the 19th. I don't think the opportunity for us to get a new person, get a new candidate, set up an interview, bring people in is likely going to happen before the 19th.
and then we meet July.
The 19th.
Yeah.
Well, July,
Yeah.
but then
Right.
that would be far too late because we, you know.
Right.
remember
That's
the
what I was looking at.
I mean, remember the
calendar.
cascading effect. If we're using an
Yes.
internal person, that's also a teacher we need to find.
Yes. Diane was first, sorry, Gail. Go ahead, Diane.
I agree with you that we need to make some decisions tonight that will move us down the road pretty quickly. But I wondered if Jason had some ideas of how we could be more aggressive in trying to find this candidate that would fill the principal's position. Because it does intrigue me that we could get this position filled. But the other scenario of the dean of students, I think, is a win-win situation. I'm very drawn to it. And I agree right now with Heidi and Dr. Leck that it's unlikely to unfold any other way, unless you have some ideas that I'm not thinking.
I would to that I would say I would just like to know more behind some of our internal candidates and why they have not been selected, and we have a superintendent who we hire to do that. I understand that. I just struggle sometimes, and this is full transparency. I just struggle sometimes with knowing the quality of people we do have in our district who are on the path and who have expressed interest, and they're either, you know, they have a discussion with Dr. Leck about not quite ready, that kind of thing. And again, that goes back to struggling with how is this scenario more effective than that?
Jason, I just want to remind you, the selection committee isn't just Dr. Leck, though. It's our typical selection committee that's made up of teachers, you know, it's of school board members, so I just want to just remind you of that.
So just one comment,
go
you know,
ahead.
11 candidates, 6 internal, 5 internal. So we've had a pretty balanced difference between, you know, when we select an internal versus an external. I think it shows the process works, that we have a fit of what we're looking for, and we find that person either external or internal.
Dan?
So the level of experience for credentials from like a zero experience administrator and the candidates that we have that maybe not quite ready, there's probably not a whole lot of difference except maybe for experience, but with the mentorship that would be available, my thought is they're closer than maybe we think. It's not like there's a huge disparity between what we're getting and what we're going to potentially get for a principal.
I think the difference is the mentoring versus being ready to make all of these decisions on your own. At a certain level, there's going to be an expectation as a building principal that I make these decisions. When you are in a mentor, mentee, dean of students position, you are not responsible for any of those decisions. You are supporting the work of the experienced person that is making those decisions. So I would not feel comfortable leaving somebody on an island if they are not ready yet to be in that position, and that's what we would be doing. We would be saying they are that person to fulfill that responsibility, and I would have a hard time making that recommendation if I do not feel a person is the right fit or ready, you know, depending on the situation, to be placed in that role. I'm certainly not trying to get out of hiring a principal. We've been pretty clear that that's what we want to do. But I'm just talking about finding a solution that makes sense for right now.
Yeah, and the entire board we had a discussion about this, and I think the whole board was on board with with the plan of hiring a principal. But the way things are playing out, that didn't work out as we initially planned. So I think we need to look at what is going to best support this building. So go ahead, Dan.
So I guess you kind of affirmed what I was thinking from a tactical day-to-day situation. There's probably not a whole lot of difference except maybe for experience. It's just that top level decision-making, principal type execution stuff. From a day-to-day perspective, they're probably very capable. They just don't have that credential or experience yet. That's kind of how I read that.
And I think it's important, too, that we open it up to everyone, and I'm a firm believer on having that master's degree. I know you never want to say never, but I think a teacher with a lot of experience and a master's degree is going to go a long ways in this position. Go ahead, Melissa. Was it Melissa? You said? Yep. Okay, Gail, go ahead. Yep, go ahead, Gail.
Question, would we have a selection committee for this too? Because so we would continue with a selection committee that involved board, Washington staff, and administration, so that, am I clear that it would go back to a selection committee?
Well, the idea would be to have some level of such committee. It might not look the same. You know, we're talking about 2 different buildings that would be impacted, not just one building. Perhaps. You know, I'm not sure that that's something that we would need. The building principal position would be the lead building principal position. This would be something different than that. But yeah, absolutely, there would be a level of selection committee.
Okay, Melissa, go ahead. Thank you for being patient.
If you could refresh my memory, when was the Washington principal position posted? How long was it out there? Is it still open?
Still open.
Okay.
It was been open for, since May 2nd.
May 2nd, okay.
You know, yeah, we acted on it in May. I guess I couldn't tell you, I don't do the posting, and I don't know exactly what happened on what days. But I would imagine, and, knowing Stacy, she took care of it Tuesday morning, after that resignation was done. And so that gets posted on NDCEL's leadership website, which is pretty typically the place that interested administrators would go to find vacancies, job service, another ed posting, ed jobs, some other posting that she posts on, and job service. So it's been from that period of time through now.
I understand that we're up against deadlines and things here, but I just really feel like we need to continue to keep that open for a little bit longer. I feel like if we don't, we're kind of sending the message that we've given up. And I don't want that to be the case. I realize that we may end up eventually having to come back and look at this other option, but I'm hoping that maybe now that school is out, there may be some people that hadn't been looking at that previously, and now the school's out, they're starting to look at some of those things. I don't know. That could just be wishful thinking, but I would like to give it a little bit more time to try to fill that position.
So Melissa, how, are you saying also opening the other position, or are you, and for how long are you? I mean, I'm just for logistics, like.
I like the
Like
idea.
if it was in March, I'd be like, yep, let's give it some time.
I like the idea of having that mentorship position also, but I just really feel like if we say, well, we're just going to go ahead and do this, we've just kind of given up that we're going to fill that position. I would like to see the Washington position filled first and then go to that other position. I know it's really cutting things close, but I'd like to see it, at least give us till July 1st to try to fill that principal position.
And then are you, so I mean, just, I'd like to talk logistics here. So if we keep that open till July 1st, and no one's going to be interviewing the week of the 4th of July. And so even if we would start interviewing the 10th, 17th that week, depending on people's availability, and we may not get any applicants, but if we would, and we don't have a viable candidate, are you saying open up this position then, like middle of July? Because I do worry a little bit then about our internal candidates being less interested when it gets so much closer to the, we start teacher, what is it, the 21st of August? So you're talking like 3 weeks before they would be back in their classroom, and then we'd have to fill that classroom position too. So just logistically, are you saying we open both at the same time, or you want to wait till the other?
Yes,
one?
I'm saying we open both at the same time, because I would still
Both at
like
the
to
same
see
time.
that
Okay,
other
okay,
position happen.
That's not what I was understanding from you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sorry. I'd
Okay,
still like
yep.
to see
And
that
Diane
other
was-
position happen, but I
Okay.
don't want us to be opening that position saying, this is going to be for you filling in the, there's the potential, but that's not going to be our plan A. Our plan A is that we fill that position with a full-time principal.
Okay.
But also fill that other position to have somebody be in the works, in the system for next year to be learning that
So
position.
adding the FTE of the dean of students is what you're
Correct.
asking for? Keeping the principal position open?
Correct.
For 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks is what you're asking for? Okay.
Yep.
And, okay. Dan?
That additional FTE, you said that's about a 90 to 100K impact then, roughly, if we keep it open. And
Yeah, it depends on the position that you hire, because it would be the teaching position that you hire, that would be the additional cost. So it depends on who you hire. But range, yeah.
Jason?
Last comment. You know, I would like at some point to get a number from administration. We're replacing some experienced staff with some brand-new teachers. Always great to have new staff. Is that substantial money savings to the district where we could, you know, call this not a wash, but you know, you get my point. Is there any way that we can monitor and measure that as of now is my question, and could we put a number to that?
Yeah, we could easily do that.
And we do have open positions too that are unknown, Jason, so some of that is, yep. So, I mean, it's a guesstimate, so, yep. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes, I know one year we hired a lot more experienced staff than what we replaced, and so it does, it's kind of a teeter-totter effect year to year, so. Yes, Diane?
I motion that we leave the principal position open at Washington Elementary, and that we approve to open a Dean of Students position available to GPS teachers to fill an internship at Washington Elementary.
Diane, do you want to specify that just to Washington, though, because that might look a little different outside of the model presented? So that was my only question on your motion. Maybe just elementary level might make it a little more. so
Elementary
just-
level.
yeah, Elementary qualified level, okay. Yeah, yeah, just making sure that you were, yeah. In the intent of both, we feel. Potentially, if not, we would be accepting that FTE for 100, potentially 100,000, depending on the teacher experience that is replaced, so. A second from Melissa. So we have a motion to keep the elementary principal position open until July 1st and hire a additional FTE for the dollar amount, which probably up to 100, for an elementary qualified dean of students. So that could even go through 6th grade or however it looks. So we have a motion and a second discussion. Go ahead, Aaron.
Did you just amend the motion that she put
No.
in? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what you, gotcha.
Yeah, she was saying elementary versus just to Washington focused. But if not, I understand Diane's intention is if the principal position does not fill, I understand Diane's intention is to put the dean of students at Washington and Louis combination like the proposal. Is that correct, Diane? I don't, okay.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on what
Yes.
it is that we're
Yeah,
voting on here, and
absolutely.
I'm not.
Yep,
so-
absolutely. Dr. Leck, go ahead.
Just
No,
the only comment I would have is, I don't think, if this is the direction that's going and that position will be open, I don't think you need to have a ending date, that you could just continue to keep that position open. I don't think it needs to be at July 1st. If you just leave it open, I mean, we could, if we filled that position in August, there would be no reason why we couldn't still work the plan as long as there is a contingency in place. The concern would be if you just open it without the intern dean of students concept, you would have no contingency. So I don't believe you would need to say July 1st as a, I would just leave it open.
Well, and I also think too, though, for that dean of students, though, I think at some point, they definitely want some definitive of where they're going. So I think that you may want to have a reasonable end date and not right up till school starts, and that's all of a sudden, oh, today, I'm changing buildings, and so, yes, Steve?
If that position is, if the principal position is already open, does that need to be part of this motion?
I think you're just giving me direction. I don't know I mean, the motion, it just makes it very clear what the direction of the board is that there would be potential for 2 positions, but one for certain.
Okay, Diane, if I get this correct, make sure you have it correct. Well, I want to make sure that everyone understands what we'll be voting on. That we have a motion and a second to continue the do not remove the principal position, keep it open on the sites that it's open on through at least July 1st. And concurrently, open the Dean of Students position to be filled with an internal qualified JPS candidate. If we do not find if we don't have a qualified applicant for the Washington principal position, the Dean of Students will fit into the alternative model that Dr. Leck presented to us. Is that correct? Any questions and we have a motion and a second on this. Any questions from the board on what we're voting on? Because I want to make sure everybody understands that. Dan?
So we'll be guaranteed to fill 1 position, but we have the possibility of having 2 positions?
Yes.
And that-
Correct.
If that possibility of 2 position comes up, that's approximately 10% of our new money from the state.
Yes.
And other
Yes.
people we already have people putting claims on it from contracts to,
Yes.
buses and things like that. So just, I want to be aware of that.
I think that's a really good point, Dan. So, yes, we're in the midst of negotiations, and that's salary money, yes. So, because we will have to fill that teacher position also. Aaron?
So then along those lines, and what is the consequence of this decision then in the case that we fill both positions? Does that directly affect what happens in negotiation, or does it affect how we handle budget and possible deficit spending?
It'll be all part of that same discussion. I'm looking at it from the new money's perspective.
Yep.
There's-
Yep.
and
For salaries.
And we'll have to play with that limitation, so.
One suggestion I would have with that, though, Mr. Roberts, is that you're talking about a 1-year issue and not a perpetual continuing contract. So you are addressing that in 1 year. That doesn't, you could deficit spend in a year for that difference, with the understanding that you would be course correcting if you needed to from a budgetary sense in a future year. So it's not in the same, I wouldn't see it as the same argument of we're going to add another kindergarten section. That would be a perpetual
Continuing.
contract that you would have, a perpetual cost that you would have because of the continuing contract. This I could see potentially as a year issue, potentially. So it could be addressed from a short-term standpoint in the budget and then course corrected later.
I mean, there's a lot of scenarios here. We could hire the Dean of Students. They might like Washington. They may stay there. I mean, or may not, or we may have to do this again. Or come up with some other option. But I think at this time, I think we're looking at a good plan. Go ahead, Aaron. Go ahead, yep.
So with that then, if this person interned 1 year, termination clause then, as far as that goes, I mean, what was that again?
Yeah, what I've outlined is that this would be a 1-year position. You would have the teaching contract, which they would have the guarantee. The other agreements are simple 1 year. It would last the duration of the school year, and then it would end. So there wouldn't be a reduction in force necessary. There would not be. That's why I want to structure it this way.
I thought part of the program though was if they're a good fit for that position, but if the district doesn't have a need to fill that, then we could still out even though, so that's the understanding of the applicants coming into this.
Correct. It's a 1 year.
It's a 1 year.
1 year agreement for the district, 1 year agreement for those individuals. There might be other opportunities that come about because of it, but it is not a guarantee.
So the program's really trying to just gain them that 1 year of experience.
Yes.
In the case of then if there's a permanent position that is open within the district, they would potentially be a candidate for that.
They would be a candidate for
with experience.
Correct.
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah. And then they can maintain their teaching continuing contract and their contract rights And this is just that add-on extra. And they do need to be, I feel they need to be compensated more because they're going to have a longer, they're going to work the principal a couple weeks before, a couple weeks after, those kinds of things. So there is additional time also, but it's that extra is just a separate one-year agreement. And they still maintain their teaching contract, which I think is a good way to do this. And again, less risk it provides less risk for the people to apply. It will encourage probably more applicants, so. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we understand? Are there any questions? Does everyone understand what they're voting on? Okay. Jason?
But realistically, if we have to hire, I know, if we have to hire someone to replace this dean of students in the classroom from 1 year, that's another financial impact. And how would we handle that as far as a continuing contract?
I would either, I touched on that with attrition, that there would be an opportunity, that person would fill an existing position that would be open. We have, we're a large district, we have attrition that would be clearly articulated to the candidate. And if we didn't have any positions, that individual would be reduced. That would be the person subject to reduction in force, not an existing staff member.
Yep, and so in the person that we hire to fill that position, it would be made very, very clear for that too as well, so. Any more discussion? I want to make sure everyone's comfortable with the motion and second that's been brought forward. Okay, I think we have a good plan for filling this position with a lot of support one way or another, the way it works out. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Christy, I'm going to have you do a roll call vote on this, please. Oh, Steve, I'm sorry, Steve.
I hate to dig back into the wording of this, but when we said a qualified applicant, there's a lot of room for,
Yeah.
I guess, miscommunication or hurt feelings there.
Yes, so we want to be very respectful for any internal candidate that applies for any position across our entire district. We have great teachers and great people in our district, and I want to make that really, really clear. The hiring, we did offer this position to a candidate that the committee felt could step into it on day one, and that person declined. The rest of the candidates, some of them, according to Dr. Leck's memo, weren't quite ready for that yet, but great candidates. And so any candidate in our district would be available to apply for this Dean of Students position. But it's also removing the risk from some other candidates who thought, should I apply, should I not? I don't know if I want to give up my teaching contract or not, So I think this Dean of Students, we could potentially, between the Teacher Leadership Academy and other interested individuals, we could have a pool there that we'll have to, choose from for that. But again, I want to be very appreciative of any internal candidate that applies. Anytime you're an internal candidate, that's always, that's not always an easy decision either to apply for a position. And so we want to be very respectful and appreciate it. So yeah, and it would be determined by the hiring committee. So, yep. So I appreciate that, bringing that forward, though. Did I answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay. I think we're ready for a vote on this, and then we will take a small break. Go ahead, Christy.
Melissa Gleason. Yes. Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Diane Hansen.
Yes.
Dan Tweeten.
No.
Gail Nelson. No. Heidi Larson.
No.
Jason Rohr.
No.
Jamie Bear. Yes. So we have 4 noes. 6 yes.
Okay.
5 yes? Yep, 5 yes. Sorry.
5 yeses, 4 noes. The motion has approved. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will come back and just finish up the rest of the agenda, okay? Just to let everybody stand up. Yep, back. calling the meeting to be back in session. Prior to us leaving for a short break, a few hours into this meeting, we need to Yep, we have to record it. Yep. And so I think we had a lot of good discussion, and I think a long discussion, because I think all of us really care about the students and staff at Washington, and we want what we can provide that's best for them. However, we called the break a little bit too quick before we finished the vote, and so we're going to have to re-vote on that motion. So I'm going to restate the motion, which we already had a second for, and then we will re-vote on that. I hit my gavel a little too quickly. So the motion is to keep the Washington principal position open until at least July 1st. Concurrently, open a Dean of Students position as outlined in Dr. Leck's memo for elementary qualified levels at the same time, with the understanding that if there isn't a qualified candidate to come forth for the Washington principal position, we will go along with the outline plan in the memo to fill that position with a shared Dean of Students and lead principal between Washington and Louis L'Amour to ensure there's coverage at both of those buildings. And there was a second for that. I want to make sure there's no questions on that before we vote again. Everyone clear on that? Okay. Christy, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Gail Nelson. Dan Tweeten. Aaron Roberts. Steve Velkamp. Melissa Gleason. Diane Hansen. Jamie Bear. Heidi Larson.
No.
Jason Rohr.
No.
So that's 4 noes. 5 yeses.
Okay. And the motion did approve for the second time, but we made sure that everyone had an opportunity to vote for that before we took our break. Moving on in our agenda, and Dr. Leck, you'll move forward with that, so thank you. Moving on the agenda, approval to hire for the 2023 to 2024 school year upon a successful background check, appropriate licensure with a salary to be adjusted upon completion of negotiations. 1 through 4. Number 1, Hannah Doctor, English teacher at a salary of $45,342.05. Juliana Wolf, music teacher at a salary of $45,342.05. Chloe Smith, special education teacher at a salary of $45,207.77. Elizabeth Lucy, elementary teacher at a salary of $43,342.05. Jay Fike, reading teacher at a salary of $45,207.77. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail. Is there a second? Second by Steve. We have a motion and a second to approve 1 through 5 hires for the 2023 to 2024 school year upon successful background check, appropriate licensure with the salary to be adjusted upon completion of negotiations with the salaries mentioned. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved, and welcome to our district. C, approval of resignations at the conclusion of the 2022 to 23 contract year 1 through 4. Allison Nord, JVCTC agricultural teacher. Paul Munson, Blue Jay Academy teacher. Danica Smith, Lincoln Elementary teacher. Jessica Irie, Blue Jay Academy teacher. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is it second by Jason? We have a motion and a second for approval of the resignations at the conclusion of the 2022 to 2023 contract year 1 through 4. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved, and we'd like to thank these 4 for their service to our district. Policy and procedures, number 6. A, approval of the 2023 to 2024 handbooks, and we have 1 through 3, Jamestown High School, Home Education Handbook, and 3, Innovation Academy Handbook. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan. Is there a second? Second by Gail. We have a motion, a second for approval of 2023 to 2024 handbooks, Jamestown High School, Home Education Handbook and Innovation Academy Handbook. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Tuition. Approval of tuition agreements, 1 through 4. Sixth grade student to attend Medina Public School for the 2023 to 2024 school year. 8th, 5th, and kindergarten students to attend Barnes County North for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Pre-K student to attend Pingree Buchanan Public School for the 2023 to 2024 school year. 7th grade student to attend Pingree Buchanan Public School for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. Motion is second to approve 1 through 4 tuition agreements. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Other. Review and acceptance of board self-evaluation that Dr. Leck covered. And Dr. Leck and I did meet on Friday and did review that as well. So is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Second by Jamie. We have a motion, a second, for review and acceptance of board self-evaluation. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Items for future agenda. Are there any items for future agenda? Gail?
I was just wondering if we could be kept abreast if the OCR issue comes up,
Okay.
so that we would know where we stand with that. That if that is something that has progressed, we could be updated at the next meeting.
Yep, any new information will be shared. Any other items for future agenda? Yes, Gail?
Personal privilege, if you haven't had a chance to go to the Celine Denault Park to see the literacy walk, it's absolutely wonderful. I encourage everyone to go. It's amazing.
Yep, Dr. Leck.
To that point, just a reminder that that was funded through our CLSD grant, and that's part of our strategy for birth to age 5 to support literacy in the community of Jamestown. So that was a partnership between the Parks and Rec, but funded through our grant.
I saw from a distance, it looked good. Good point, Gail, yeah. Any other items for future agenda? If you have an item for future agenda, please let Dr. Leck or myself know. Meetings to be scheduled. We have teacher negotiations on Thursday, June 8th at 4:30 PM in Thompson Community Room at the middle school. We have a school board meeting on Monday, June 19th, 2023 at 5:15 in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. Possible, next agenda item is possible executive session to discuss negotiation strategies. Dan?
Discussions on negotiations and developing a strategy relative to the school board's petition in this matter in open session would have an adverse fiscal effect on the board, position of board and district. Therefore, I move that the board enter an executive session, the following members and negotiators be identified as being present. School board members Diane Hansen, Melissa Gleason, Heidi Larson, Gail Nelson, Aaron Roberts, Jason Rohr, Dan Tweeten, Steve Feldkamp, and Jamie Bear. Superintendent Robert Leck and Business Manager Christy Grounds. Date is June 5th at 7:55 PM. At the only the following topic will be considered in executive session: negotiation strategies. The legal authority for this executive session is Section 44-04-19.1 of the North Dakota Century Code, and that this executive session be recorded.
Do we have a motion? Is there a second? Second by Steve. We have a motion and a second for possible executive session to discuss negotiation strategies. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Please note that after executive session, we will come back into regular session, back to this room, and close out the meeting.